Welcome to the Fitness Pain-Free Show, where I help physical therapists learn how to get their clients out of pain and back to training in the gym. My name is Dan Pope, and I'll be your instructor. I'm a physical therapist, coach, and fellow meathead. I love training just as much as you do and want to help you get all of your patients out of pain and back to the gym where they belong. What's going on, guys? This is Dan from Fitness Pain Free. We have another show for you. This one's going to be a case study, multi-direction instability in a CrossFit athlete. Let's get going. So first and foremost, thank you so much for your support. You allow me to do what I love for a living. My name is Dan Pope. I'm a physical therapist, coach, personal trainer, and meathead. I love fitness. I love lifting weights. This is the Fitness Pain Free Show where we help coaches and physical therapists like you get your patients out of pain and back to training. If you are watching this on YouTube, please hit that like button, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to the podcast, please give a 5-star review. It's much appreciated. So, if you want to go that extra mile and support the channel even further, please consider subscribing to my premium membership, Fitness Pain Free Insiders. It's a comprehensive educational resource and toolkit for the fitness and rehab professional. So think Netflix, but for trainers and physical therapists. It's premium content from yours truly. I make all the content on there, and it's similar content to the show, but way more in depth. It's updated monthly. I've been updating this thing for the past 5 or so years, and there's a lot on there. There's 100 plus webinars, ebooks, and complete guides. You also have access to a private Facebook group to have all of your questions answered by me. You also get a chance to decide upcoming podcast topics. So if there's something you really want to learn more about, hear me go in depth about, let me know. I can do that. And you can get started for just $1 for a week-long trial. And after that, it's a recurring membership of $9.99. All right. You can cancel anytime. All right. I won't be upset if you do. And if you want to get started, all you need to do is head to fitnesspainfree.com, click on the programs link, and then click on the Fitness Pain Free Insiders online library and get started. All right. Let's get rolling on to the topic of today. So, we have a 33-year-old female. She is a recreational CrossFitter, and she trains 5 times per week. And here's the thing. She's the type of person that's not really competitive at all, right? She's never done much sporting over the course of her life, really. She just kind of likes fitness. She's not competitive at all. She likes that cardio aspect of training, okay? She's not the type of person that really likes the barbell lifting. She likes kind of getting sweaty, getting in, getting out, right? And she had a gradual onset of right-sided shoulder pain. It started several months prior to evaluation. And the thing that really bugged it the most at first was with dips, right? And what happened is that over the course of time, she had more and more pain in other activities. And now she got to the point where regular activities in her life hurt. So reaching into the cabinet, reaching into the kitchen, getting a gallon of milk, all that stuff is now hurting her, right? The pain is in the anterior shoulder, so right in the front. It gets better with rest, but returns with activity. So she's trialed rest, staying away from activities in the gym, gets a bit better. When she goes back, it just hurts again. It hurts during overhead lifts, so that could be overhead press, Olympic lifts, also hanging, so trying to do any sort of pull-up, kipping pull-up, muscle-up, toes to bar, all hurts. And also hurts during pressing. So like I said before, dips are probably the worst, but push-ups feel horrible too, right? And here's the thing. I'd classify her as fairly irritable, which just basically means a lot of things hurt. And for folks like this, oftentimes them continuing to do CrossFit within the gym can provoke them to a point where they get very frustrated and they don't make progress, okay? She was kind of on the verge of me saying, hey, let's back off of CrossFit for a little bit, right? Let it calm down, and we'll go back once you feel better. However, I hate doing that. I don't like to take people away from their fitness and what they love, so we really tried to modify, and that's really going to be what we cover in this podcast today, right? We're going to talk about how we modified for her. What else do we find during this subjective evaluation? She's very, very willing to modify. She doesn't really care about being competitive in any way. So basically, if I tell her like, hey, don't snatch again for the rest of your life, she'd be like, fine, I don't care. I don't really like snatching that much anyway, right? And she's also very coachable. Like I said, she's not performance driven. She's very likely for her to just take any modification advice and listen to it, right? The other thing that's a little bit challenging working with her is that her fitness is not really the biggest priority in her life. She does it kind of as a chore and as a way to kind of clear her head after kind of a long day of work, right? So she has a family and she's very career driven. And for some of these folks, it's hard to get compliance because they don't always spend as much time in the gym. They're not the people that show up 10, 15, 20 minutes early to do mobility and then stay afterwards to do accessory work, right? They're getting in the gym last minute, getting a workout in and getting the heck out of there, right? And that makes it really challenging to create a good home exercise program and get people on board with it, right? So what we try to do is make it as much as possible a no-brainer for the patient and make sure they can actually get through their program, right? She was also relatively inexperienced in sports, right? Her background was as a runner and she did minimal activity really. So she was in decent shape, but she wasn't used to working out that hard, right? So that was an important thing for me to keep in mind when writing a rehab program for her. And getting down to her goals, she was looking for long-term health and she really enjoyed cardio and the cardio aspect of CrossFit and really just wants to stay fit. So doesn't really have any big goals of getting stronger, competing CrossFit. That, concerns her less, right? So how did the objective measurements look? So when we start looking at her strength and did some manual muscle testing, we found that shoulder flexion, abduction, and external rotation was painful. And it was pretty strong, right? I wasn't concerned that she had a big cuff tear necessarily right off the top, right? But it did seem like she was pretty irritated with those movements. In terms of range of motion, she really had excessive range of motion, right, at the shoulder. So flexion, external rotation, internal rotation, just mobile all over the place. And then when I did some capsular testing, she was excessively mobile within the joint as well. Okay, so I'm already going down this pathway of like, okay, she's a mobile person in general. The other thing we found with her is she had decreased upward rotation when you bring the arm overhead. And in folks that have multi-direction instability, they usually have some redundancy of the shoulder capsule so that when they bring their arm overhead, there's extra capsule. The shoulder blade doesn't have to move that much, okay? If I have a very, very stiff shoulder capsule, when I bring my arm overhead, I usually get a ton of shoulder upward rotation, scapular upward rotation. For her, there was minimal scapular upward rotation, which is a sign that she's probably just really mobile in that joint, which is what we found when we did all of her tests, right? In terms of regional interdependence testing, she's basically mobile everywhere. So if you watch a deep squat, it looks amazing, right? It's one of those folks where you watch them squat and you're like, dang, that looks really easy, right? She had a positive Baton scale. A couple of the tests that we did were positive. She's hypermobile all over the place. Like I said, it's not just in the shoulder. And when she squats, it's very, very upright, which just shows me that she has good hip mobility, ankle mobility, shoulder mobility. Everything moves well, okay? So that's probably not an element that we have to focus on. Although keep in mind, there are some folks that maybe have a positive Baton scale, but they're very stiff in one particular area like the ankle. So for her, that wasn't the case. She was kind of mobile all over the place, okay? So when we started doing some special tests, we found the Hawkins-Kennedy and Neers test was positive. She had a lot of tender to palpation of the posterior cuff, so the muscles on the back of the shoulder blade were really tender when we were poking around. In terms of instability testing, so apprehension, the cross-body test, abduction, external rotation, all of those tests were negative. She doesn't feel like the shoulder is slipping out of the socket, but she does have pain at end range, okay? So that's going to be important when we start prescribing exercises at the start of her rehab. And then she had negative AC joint tests. So with this evaluation, my diagnosis was some sort of multi-direction instability, right? She's relatively unstable within the shoulder joint, a lot of capsular laxity. And because of that, maybe she has some cuff or biceps tendon related pain. I don't know exactly what the pain generator is per se, but I think a lot of it is kind of driven by the lack of control within the shoulder. So what's the plan of care? How do we start our treatment? First and foremost, like I said, I'm concerned that if she keeps working out in the gym the same way she has, this is going to get more and more irritated. She's already tried to do some modification and some rest, and this thing keeps on getting worse and more irritable. It's not moving in the right direction, so we have to change something about what she's doing from an exercise perspective. And the way that I do this is by using a patient-specific functional scale, which is a very common scale in physical therapy. Basically, what you're doing is you're taking a bunch of movements that the individual wants to get back to. I use all the common movements you'll find in a CrossFit gym. And you rate each movement on a scale of 0 to 10. 0 to 10 means there's no way you could ever possibly perform this movement due to your pain or injury. A 10 out of 10 means that you could always perform this movement and your pain or injury never interferes, right? So basically, 0 out of 10, real bad. Could never do it. 10 out of 10, piece of cake. Never bothers my injury. And if you can't perform a given movement, like muscle-ups, for example, due to a lack of strength or technique, don't factor that into your training. So for example, if you have ankle pain, then your training for muscle up should be 10 out of 10, even if you can't perform muscle ups, right? You have to make sure that you're not giving yourself a 0 out of 10 for the muscle up just because you can't do them. You have to factor in your pain or injury, okay? So unfortunately, I know a lot of you guys are listening to this via podcast. I have the patient's patient-specific scale in front of me, and I'll read it out to you. So for double unders, she was a 5 out of 10. For ring muscle ups, 0. Bar muscle ups, 0. Toes to bar, 0. Makes sense. Very shoulder-intensive movements are 0. Double unders, 5. So she's kind of moderate with a movement that typically doesn't bother people's shoulders too much, right? Wall balls, 2. Thrusters, 1. Chest or bar pull-ups, 0. Maximal snatches from a power perspective, 2. Snatch, power, cycling is 2. Squat snatches, heavy, are 2. Squat snatches, cycling are 2. Maximal cleans from a power perspective are 5. Maximal cleans, power, cycling are 5. Squat cleans, maximally 5. Squat cleans where you're cycling the barbell are 5. Deadlifts are 10. Box jumps are 10. That makes sense. They don't stress the shoulder too much. Burpees are 5. Overhead squats, 3. Maximal jerks, 1. Cycling jerks, 1. Rows, 8. Push-ups, 1. Push press, 1. Shoulder overhead, 1. Handstand push-up, 0. Lunges, 10. Single arm snatch, 5. Strict pull-up, 5. Rope climb, 0. Dumbbell clean and jerk, 3. Right? So just to give you an idea, that's super irritable. Okay, she's really not able to get away with much overhead stuff in the gym without pain. And this is a problem because if she keeps on exercising, right, even if she's trying her best to modify, things are probably going to hurt. You probably can't get through a single workout without encountering some of those movements that were, zeros, right? It's going to be very hard to work out. So what I do is have the individual fill out this patient-specific functional scale, and anything that's below an 8 out of 10, I just give them a modification, right? So for double under, she got a 5. That's below the 8. I give her single unders, right? For ring muscle ups, she has a 0. There's no way she can do a muscle up. I give her a ring row with a shoulder tap. Same thing goes for bar muscle up. Wall balls are turned into medicine ball cleans. Chest to bar pull-ups are turned into ring rows. Snatches are turned into, let's say if it's a squat snatch, a front squat. If it's a power snatch, it gets turned into a kettlebell swing, right? Heavy cleans with a squat are turned into front squats as well. Overhead squats are turned into front squats. Jerks are turned into some sort of aerobic piece, or you eliminate the movement. So what I tend to do is if a movement does not have a suitable modification that kind of matches what you're trying to do with that movement. So if you're trying to do, let's say, a push press, right? You want to try to train the shoulders. If you can't find a movement that's going to be tolerated well, right? It kind of gets a similar goal of working the shoulders. You just get rid of it or turn it into an aerobic piece, okay? Strict pull-ups were turned into ring rows. Dumbbell clean and jerks were turned into single arm kettlebell swings. If you want to see the full list, then just head over to YouTube and take a look at the patient-specific functional scale yourself. But here's the thing. This is incredibly important because I want this individual to continue exercising. Exercising is so important for health in general. It's just that if she doesn't modify, she's in a lot of trouble, okay? So this makes it a bit of a no-brainer. So the athlete knows when a movement pops up in the gym, she can just go on her list and say, hey, instead of doing this exercise, I'm going to do this exercise. And the other thing that I do, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is that I make a Google Doc and I send this to the coaches within the gym. So the coaches know how to modify as well. So what we're trying to do is make this a no-brainer as much as we possibly can for the athlete, right? So after we have the modifications out of the way, what do we have to do next? Well, for one, we have to build some strength and capacity within the shoulder, right? She's very unstable at this point, right? And painful. So I'm trying to promote some strength and stability there. So from a strength perspective, what are we trying to do? Well, for one, we want to avoid end ranges of motion initially. When we did our test, we found that when we moved into end range flexion, external rotation, internal rotation, abduction, all the movements, they're all painful at end range. I don't want to provoke that shoulder too much, so I'm going to keep my strengthening in middle range of motion, okay? Generally speaking, for my rehab programs, 3 times per week of work. I would have wanted to probably do about 5 times per week of strength work and have the days, 2 days worth of rotator cuff strengthening and 3 days of other general strengthening. But I just didn't think that this patient would be able to do that. Like I said, she's super busy. She's not necessarily going to be able to find her way into the gym and get that stuff done. So we just gave her 3 times a week. Maybe not the most optimal, but pretty good, right? For her, she's doing all of her work at the start of a session, and that's actually a pretty big ask because she starts, I think her class where she liked to go to is at 5:30 a.m., so she had to get in at 5:15, right, in the morning to do all of her rehab stuff, and that's tough, especially when you have children, right, and you have to head to work afterwards. It's a big ask, but she was able to do it. She said that would be something that's reasonable for her. So what kind of exercises was she doing? What did I prescribe her? So I was giving her some sort of press variation 3 times per week, and that started off with some sort of landmine press, some dumbbell floor press, and some tempo push-ups. Basically, we're working in partial ranges. We're not doing as much overhead work. We're slowing down the movements a little bit, giving her strengthening exercises that she tolerates well. They're going to promote some stability within the shoulder joint. We're giving her rotator cuff and scapular strengthening exercises. Initially, that was sideline external rotation, some scaption, A's, T's, and Y's, basic stuff. I was giving a lot of rows, single arm rows, pull downs, and ring rows. Initially, she was pretty painful whenever she tried to protract. So think about doing a ring row and at the very end, relaxing and letting your shoulder blades protract. She didn't tolerate that at all, right? So hanging, that was pretty much out of the question. If she had to let her shoulder blades relax, it was pretty painful for her shoulder. So initially, we didn't protract, okay? We just focused on kind of partial ranges of motion. And as we felt better over the course of time, I started to cue the protraction. It was more tolerable and it got better slowly. So what else did we do for her? So in terms of technique adjustments, at first, I didn't want to try to work on her technique at all because everything was so painful. I wasn't going to ask her to go snatch because she's having pain just bringing her arm overhead. Okay, I wasn't going to get any good information from that. Okay, and here's another spoiler alert. So as people get better, generally you want to take a look at their technique and see if they're doing anything silly that may hurt them in the future. This is a bit of a spoiler alert, but I didn't have to do any of this. Okay, over the course of time, she was getting better, doing well, getting back to the movements, and I actually have a lot of trust in the coaches that she works with. So I actually didn't have to address her technique very much, right? Well, how about mobility? Did you do anything with mobility? No, I don't think I had to whatsoever. It really wasn't needed. Here's the thing, just because someone has a positive Baton scale, and I've seen this so many times, someone comes in, they get a diagnosis of being hypermobile, and then when I take a look at their mobility, yeah, they're largely hypermobile, but let's say they have a really specific limitation. Sometimes that's the ankle, right? So if I have hypermobility in the shoulder and I have a really stiff ankle, when I snatch or overhead squat, I'm going to make up for that mobility limitation in the shoulder itself. So just make sure you're doing your due diligence. And when someone comes in and seems very mobile, just make sure you check them, all right? Make sure they actually are hypermobile. And you're not just saying that because other areas seem hypermobile. So the next step was good communication. Luckily, she was actually referred to me through a local CrossFit coach that I really trust. Okay. And that's super helpful because I know that we're going to work together to get this person better. And I'm not guessing in terms of what the coach is going to be able to do and what they're going to be able to modify. Because oftentimes I think that I'm doing a great job, give them everything they need, and they go to whatever XYZ gym and I can't communicate with the coaches. Maybe they don't reach back out to me. You know, I don't know who they are. I just can't reach out. And what ends up happening is that they may kind of undermine their progress just by doing a little too much. So make sure you communicate with the coaches. We did in this case. I knew the coach, I have good communication with them. And I made a Google Doc. And in the Google Doc, I put all the strength exercises. I put all of the potential goals from a technique perspective, all the drills I think would be helpful to work on, and all the modifications, so that patient-specific functional scale. And basically, now the coach can go into that doc and say, hey, what should we modify today? Oh, snatches. They typically bother you. What's the modification we're supposed to focus on? Oh, okay, all we have to do is front squat. Great. So load up the bar and we'll do some front squats in this workout. And now the coach doesn't have to do as much work to try to figure out what is okay and what's not okay because we already did that work on the back end with the patient-specific functional scale. And lastly, we didn't necessarily need this with this patient, but I do think that it's important that if someone is not progressing over the course of time, it's probably worthwhile to go to a doctor, right, to get some imaging, see what the heck is going on, right? Generally speaking, things like rotator cuff tears tend not to happen in younger folks, right? This person was in her 30s. I'm not expecting she has a full thickness rotator cuff tear, but I've been surprised by multiple people, right? I mean, recently, I just had someone reach out to me that was looking for some help. We tried a lot of rehab over the course of time. Things weren't progressing, went to the doctor, full thickness rotator cuff tear at the age of 35. I also have worked with a 31-year-old female before who had pain in the shoulder. She tried rehab for a while. Things weren't getting better. She actually had a full thickness rotator cuff tear as well. And I'll tell you what, she actually PR'd her jerk a day before she went to see the doctor, right? So sometimes you would expect these folks to be really weak. That's not always the case. They might hurt and they might be great compensators and their strength might be A-okay, but it hurts a lot. So I just kind of educate the patient and say, if things are not getting better, let's go to the doc and see what's going on. I think this can be handled with conservative care, but at the end of the day, let's be cautious. So as we started to progress, what were future visits looking like, right? So I was seeing her pretty much every week in the beginning, and then after a while, I started seeing her every other week as she started to improve. The majority of the visits actually consisted of soft tissue work to the posterior cuff, so infraspinatus, teres minor, upper trap, just because those were pretty irritable, and it helped to calm the area down. And then after we did, let's say 10 to 15 minutes of soft tissue work, we did a lot of dynamic control and rhythmic stabilizations. So at Champion Performance, with the physical therapy side, we have all sorts of systems set up for shoulder pain where we start with easy manuals and just kind of work our way up. I do have specific manuals I like to use for my CrossFit athletes. Maybe I'll cover those at some point in the future, but we're really trying to promote as much control as possible within that shoulder joint, right? She's got instability from all angles, and the better we can control motion, the better we do, right? And then over the course of time, we just advance her strength work. And we want to try to make the strength work specific to the movements that are still giving her trouble. And what's kind of interesting about this athlete is that her overhead exercises returned pretty quickly. So things like push jerks, things like snatches, those actually got better relatively quickly, which was kind of funny. Oftentimes you think overhead motion is going to be the last thing to get back. That wasn't the case for her. The last thing to come back were push-ups and dips, right? So in terms of trying to get those better, we worked on elevated push-ups. We did a lot of horizontal dumbbell pressing because her overhead stuff was feeling great. She was able to return to a lot of that in the gym, but push-ups and dips still felt terrible. So we had to work on getting those better, and our exercises reflected that, right? Our cuff work went from more under the shoulder to overhead because we want to make sure the cuff is getting stronger for the activities in the gym. We added more protraction and full hangs during rows and pull-ups. Initially, that wasn't tolerated. Over the course of time, we need to get back to that because we know these athletes are going to find themselves in those positions, and we have to prepare them for those. And then we just reevaluated and did another patient-specific functional scale to see where she's at. Now, this is actually the third patient-specific functional scale. We had one in the middle of the two, so you'll see these numbers are way better, right? And I'll read these off quickly, and then hopefully if you're on YouTube, you can see these. You can pause it and just read it yourself. And if you're listening to the podcast version, then you can head to YouTube and see these. I'm going to briefly go through them. So double unders improved to a 10. Ring muscle-ups are improved to a 4. Bar muscle-ups improved to a 7. Toes to bar, 9. Wall balls, 8. Thrusters, 9. Chest to bar pull-ups, 9. Snatch, power, maximal, 7. Snatch, power, cycling, 8. Snatch, squat, maximal, 6. Snatch, squat, cycling, 6. Clean, power, maximal, 10. Clean, power, cycling, 10. Clean, squat, maximal, 10. Clean, squat, cycling, 10. Deadlifts are 10. Box jumps 10, burpees 5, overhead squats 8, jerks maximal 6, jerk cycling 8, rows 10, push-ups 4, push press 8, shoulder overhead 8, handstand push-up 6, lunges 10, single arm snatch 8, strict pull-up 9, rope climb 8, dumbbell clean and jerk 8. So if you remember from earlier, we were dealing with a lot of zeros to like 2 and 3, right? Now most movements are kind of in that 7 to 10 range, okay? And generally speaking, when athletes are at an 8 or above, I'll allow them to do those movements within class, okay? If they're below that 8, we'll modify. And we don't have to modify very many things. So ring muscle-ups are modified to pull-ups and modified push-ups. Same thing with bar muscle-ups. Wall balls were an 8 out of 10. Anything that's an 8 or a 9 out of 10, I just tell athletes to be careful with volume. So if a workout comes up that's 150 wall balls per time, if Karen pops up, I don't think that's going to be a good idea for the shoulder. We have to break those up a little bit, maybe put in some assault bike for calories somewhere in the mix so we're not doing so many wall balls. But generally speaking, she was back to doing most movements in the gym. Okay, which is awesome to see. That's exactly what we want. And then what we do is we update this patient-specific functional scale every time it's performed, every month or so. And we send it back to the coach, so the coach now knows, okay, let's start progressing to this. Okay, but okay, this still we can't advance yet. This is still hurting, right? So let's continue going here. So how did this end up finishing, right? So as we got further and further into her rehabilitation, she's feeling better and better. What happened from that perspective? So we continued to advance her strength work. Like I said, it really wasn't overhead stuff that was giving her trouble. It was more the push-up and the dip. So we ended up giving her lots of horizontal dumbbell pressing, elevated push-ups. We did a lot of ring supports, and then eventually we transitioned to stable dips, right, with some assistance from the feet. Eventually she got back to ring dips, right? We got the cuff work more overhead. Like I said before, we're doing more protraction and full hangs or in rows and pull-ups, and we're monitoring total training volume, just making sure that those movements that she's now reintroducing back in the gym, when they're reintroduced, we don't do way too much volume and just irritate the shoulder too much, because it's a fresh new movement that's finally tolerated, but you don't have as much capacity to be able to do a full workout that has a lot of volume in it, right? So over the course of time, this is generally how I do my PT at Champion. We're out of network, so we don't have to be at the mercy of an insurance company generally. So our PT just went down and down. Eventually, I was seeing it kind of once per month, right? And then as people are feeling better and they feel like they don't need me anymore, I allow them to be on their own, right? The entirety of her PT was around 5 to 6 months, which maybe sounds like a long time, but it's not like I saw her 3 times a week. I was seeing her once per week in the beginning, and at the very end, it was like once per month. So total visits, like, I don't know, maybe 10-ish visits, maybe less than that over the entirety of her physical therapy stay, right? And I got to say, 5 to 6 months is pretty common for shoulders. This is not one of those conditions that gets better in 6 to 8 weeks, right? This actually takes quite a bit of time. I think that's pretty matched with what you see in, let's say, the rotator cuff tendinopathy literature. You're looking at months, 4 to 6 months to really see a large improvement. And I think for a lot of folks you'll see, they're pretty young, right? So they get better a little faster than someone that's a bit older, right? But they're also trying to get back to really high level stuff. So they may be feeling pretty good, come 1-2 months out once they've done a good job of modifying and beginning a strengthening program in their regular activities. But getting back to the higher level stuff doesn't come for months and months later. So just keep that in mind. You want to make sure you set that expectation at the start of rehab so folks don't get frustrated when a month later they still have pain, right? It just takes time. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much for joining me on the Fitness Pain Free Show. Hopefully, if you have an athlete that has some multi-directional instability and they're trying to get back to something in the gym, whether that's CrossFit or powerlifting, whatever it is, hopefully this gives you a little bit of help, right? Helps you better communicate with the coaches, helps you improve the athlete's performance, get them back to doing whatever they love, okay? Thank you very much for your support. If you're viewing this on YouTube, please give me a thumbs up. I'd love to hear your comments on this, how you treat your MDI patients. If you agree with me, disagree with me somewhere, have anything good to add, please subscribe. It helps me out a ton. If you're listening to this via podcast, please give me a positive rating and review. Helps enormously. And if you want to go the extra step to really help me out, head over to fitnesspainfree.com, go to the program section, and then subscribe to the Fitness Pain Free Insiders. Like I said, get a $1 week-long trial. After that, it's only $9.99 a month. You've got more great learning there. All right, thanks a lot, and I'll see you on the next one.